friends. Welcome to episode number 1 of the No Small Stories podcast. This week, I'm going to talk to my friend Shane, who is a writer at inknell.com. You can find his links in the description. I really enjoyed our conversation. It goes from writing and the inspiration for writing, why we write, the therapeutic purposes that writing can be used for. We even talk a little bit about AI. It's a great conversation, and by the end of it, I think I have him convinced to co-host with me on this new podcast adventure. So do tune in. I hope you enjoy.
Okay. So Haleigh and I thought what would be fun, a little experiment for this poem prompt would be to see what AI did with a poem that I wrote first, and then fed it back through and tried to give it some prompt ideas. So the first one is called The Chase. Even in the simplest needs of Atlatl and Whetstone, a new hunt was begun. Slow stalking of millennia, overtaking generation by generation the means of creation, forcing an answer out from the same question of humanity. And then when I fed that back through, trying to kind of get the same prompt, ChatGPT 3.5, I've heard that 4 is a bit more creative when it comes to this. I couldn't get it to not rhyme, or I couldn't get it to do free verse instead, so I don't know if that's a question of the algorithm or if that's a problem with my prompt, that I couldn't give it the right role. But this is what ChatGPT came up with. Through the ages, from Atlatl to Whetstone, the primal hunt, a new quest was known. Generation by generation, a slow stalk. As time unwound, humanity would talk. The means of creation a perennial yearn, forcing answers from questions we discern. In this poem's essence, woven like a thread, the eternal quest where human hearts are led. And that's what I did when I when I fed my poem through ChatGPT and asked it to give me an 8-line poem based on that poem. When I asked it just to give me a poem based on, let's see here, AI. When I said, write me a poem about AI taking over creation, and then I asked it to put it down into a 8-line format. Its first one was, in realms where dreams and wires entwine, emerges a tale of creation divine. Artificial minds, algorithms concealed, unleashing powers wondrous and surreal. Born from curious, bright human minds, AI's potential shines, might that binds. Will AI's reign bring joy and lasting peace, or shackle creation in an algorithmic lease? Again, like I said, I couldn't get it to do based off of a poet that did free verse, or I think stuck in there in the again in the brain of the AI or the algorithm. Poetry has to rhyme, or poetry is meant to have this sort of rhyme pattern, which a lot of it does, and for good reason. It's easily remembered that way, and it's more like a song, and but again, just some difference and some different associations. So love to hear your guys' comments on kind of what you think, and kind of go from there. Thanks. Your background there.
Thank you. It's fake.
Yeah.
It's a tapestry. It gives me the illusion of having a nice big window.
Right.
You know, that's what I like about it. So here with my new friend and fellow writer, Shane Fischer, from inknell.com. I love the concept of your website. So if you could just give us a little introduction to you and your website and the services that you offer.
Sure. Well, thank you, for the introduction. So I've been a poet, I think ever since I was probably an adolescent, just as a form of therapy and self-expression. And so it's always the way that I perceive the world in a way, to write it down and then to kind of reflect it back into me to understand things. So that's when I started doing it. And I kept doing it up through college and being a parent and all those things. And it was always something that I really wanted to do, obviously as a means to support myself, but that's tough to do in any case, especially these days, to
It's
do it
it's
full time
still
as
the
a
dream
writer.
though. It's still the
Exactly.
dream.
Yeah,
You got to hang on to it. It's possible.
it's possible. So really, what ended up happening was kind of a random situation. So I met a lady in town. I started becoming a typewriter, bit of an obsessed kind of enthusiast, and through a transaction that I had with the lady, I came into owning her father's personal typewriter, and
Oh,
it was a
very
very cool
cool.
story, yeah, of getting that sort of family heirloom. So at that time, just as COVID was starting, I started posting more regularly on Instagram. I'm like, well, can I, now that I'm writing a bit more regularly, can um, can I do a memoriam for him? Can I do a poetry sort of in his honor? And so she gave some of his obituary information and his biographical stuff. And from that, I concentrated and focused into a poem, and she really loved it. And it was just kind of a remarkable, rewarding experience on both sides. And at that time, I'm like, okay, well, if I can make this a service, if I can make this transaction or interaction repeatable, I could maybe make poetry practical again in a means of using it, other than just pure entertainment, or other than just trying to promote or market my own poetry, but actually using poetry to help other people reflect their own lives and reflect people who have passed. And so really I thought, what ended up being the most disappointing part of of some of my experiences were funerals, were obituaries, were the fact that these people, they have these big end of life celebrations, right? And how little they seem to reflect on the person themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought for sure that would be like the way to go, and that's kind of what I wanted to start doing. And then I realized that this process of interviewing a person, of getting a person's life, and putting it into some semblance of poetry, or concentrating into some form in that way, is really available to all pieces and parts of life. So whether that's weddings or anniversaries or births or childhoods, or even getting more into brand legacies and businesses, and uh, really anything that you can imagine that has a story to be told.
Yeah, you can extrapolate those skills out and really, help
Exactly.
help people in a lot of different facets.
Yeah. So that the website is, I'm actually working on a new rendition of it, but the website is really just more of a landing page to get people to. It's kind of a hard thing to understand. Actually, I need to add more videos to it. It's a hard thing to really even explain in words without getting the experience itself, or without knowing somebody who's gone through the experience. So I rely a lot on people, on referrals, or people who have gone through the process, be like, no, this really works. No, this really does help. Like, no, what was done, like, really added something to this person's life, and it really ended up being the right words to be said. But to get that idea across on the website, especially for people who don't, I think a personalized poet is more of a recent. I don't know. I mean, it used to be. I've talked to other people, and they totally remind me of like the bard tradition, and I'm like,
Right.
oh yeah, like that
Yeah.
totally used to happen. Like people used to just like kind of travel from town to town singing stories about other people and other places that he's
Right.
been, and like that tradition has been, is long standing. It's really the tradition of oral, spoken word and poetry. But I feel like it's
A
becoming
song to
something
be
else.
remembered by, sort of.
Yeah. But I feel like it's becoming something else as we sort of kind of dive into this new, as we have dived into this new millennium, and we're kind of trying to pick back old parts of things to, I don't know, make something new out of it. So I'm not the first personalized poet. I'm definitely not the only personalized poet person on Instagram or on online, but I'm trying to do it in a different way, where I'm hoping it brings a lot more, I don't know, more intimate qualities to it, and hopefully
Yeah.
it's better for that. So
No, I love that. And I love the story of, like, getting that typewriter from that woman. And, isn't that sort of, I love it when the universe just kind of brings you situations that lead you into, like, here's this thing that you could be doing, that here's a way to use your creativity and your skills to add value,
right,
or to, like, to assist someone else. And I do love the idea of the personal poetry, especially for for someone who's lost a loved one, the memorialized, poetry, because I think that it's probably something that is very assistive to people who are in the grieving process, to be able to have something like that is a beautiful piece of art to remember them and to sort of celebrate their life. So I really do. I love that idea.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you so much. And it is a bit of like it's in the same vein of sort of counseling. I mean, do I have,
mhm.
that was one that I was considering when I went to college, whether it was English or whether it was psychology. Those were kind of big interests in my lives. But the idea of what poetry and writing can do as a self-expression, as a form of therapy, there is always, I think, a bit of, um, at least for me, like you do feel like a counselor. I mean, the biggest part of me, besides, big dream, obviously doing it full time and having it sustain myself and like this is all that
Right.
I have to worry about, this is all that I get to do. But also it's rewarding through every experience. I gain some piece or some like facet of empathy that I didn't have before because it's for a new person, it's for a new experience, like a new life that I had never known about, and to try and to continue to try to understand people, right? Every person that you run
Right.
into. And so to have the opportunity of this experiment of empathy each time that I do a poem is really, it's a really cool experience. But I do feel like a counselor where it's like, okay, this is either a hard time for them to come to terms with or describe or really commemorate at that time, or they just don't have the capacity to do so. And so I'm there to help facilitate all that. And that's essentially, a counselor in many ways where it's like you're coming in, at a point where you can't process this on your own, whatever it is.
Right.
And so then they walk you through it and they ask you the questions. And it's a similar type of interaction. So.
Well, and I think it's probably also, therapeutic in the sense of being able to really hone in and focus on the good memories, focus on the things you loved about a person, and give
Mm-hmm.
you that information, and really be able to, create something that encompasses that whole person. I'm sure that is absolutely a very therapeutic situation for them. But then definitely, in these other situations you're talking about too, if it's a wedding, if it's a graduation, certainly being able to, on the flip side of that, memorialize a happy moment, an exciting moment, a life event that you want to remember in a way that is unique. And kind of like you said with the bard, it's kind of, you could remember it because the poetry is it's like a song, it's like song lyrics. It's something that is
Mm-hmm.
easier for you to memorize, it's easier for you to absorb, sort of. And I really do, I love it. I love the whole idea of all of it.
Yeah, thank you so
So
much.
for for you, when you started writing poetry, like, and I agree with you, I love the idea of learning more about people's stories, because I think it helps us learn about ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because in that empathy you learn more about yourself. So can you talk maybe a little bit about, if you're comfortable with it, your own
Sure, of
personal
course.
story, and how did poetry start out as being something therapeutic for you personally, as an adolescent?
Yeah. I actually talked a little bit about this. So another avenue that I'm pursuing as well uh, is going to recovery and rehab facilities and kind of giving. I would like to give their counselors or their coaches some sort of presentation or information on why writing and journaling and poetry is an extension of that works
Mm-hmm.
for getting a person back to like being mentally healthy, like being able to write down what you're thinking and then read it to yourself. Like it's huge because if it stays up here, right, it's like, it's jumbled. Okay,
Right.
there's no way to get it out or like define it. And there's no way to even like keep it. Like it's just kind of moving from, you know,
You
face to
don't
face.
ever really process anything if it's stuck up here. When you write it down,
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
can, it helps you to, and then you read it, and you can perceive it in a different way when you are sort of, looking at it from maybe an outside perspective, so to say.
Exactly. Yeah. Unless like you're really good at meditating, but even the whole point of meditating is to be thoughtless, right? Is to like
Mm-hmm.
not have your thoughts control you, right? But if you want to figure out why or understand why you're thinking the way that you are or feeling the way that you are, you have to write it down. You have to give it some depth and you have to kind of give it a line to sort of follow. And so those are some of the things that I have said at these meetings where it's like I think I started writing poetry. I started journaling really, and
Mm-hmm.
the way that I journaled was is essentially how I write poetry. So, there's the, kind of stereotypical style of journaling where we think it's just, you write about exactly about what happened in your day, right? You just
Right.
kind of, and that's one way to do it. And that's one way to certainly like work on and practice your recall and your process of the day and your memory and all that stuff and just
Well, also
document
to
it.
look at your perceptions, like what,
Yes.
because I'm someone who journals too, and I did used to write a lot of poetry also when I was like in middle school, and I do think it's a way to see what your perceptions were in the moment, the way that you
Yes.
recall an event, if you're recalling it, on the day, might be very different than the way that you look back on it. When you look back on it, you
Right.
might see your emotional perception of that event was very different in the moment than it might be now. So
Yes.
it is a lot of sort of self-analysis.
Yes. So very true. So it's really depending on how you want to record it, but whether you're doing it in the moment or you're looking back on it. I didn't quite it didn't come to me that way. So for me to document my day was really hard. I don't know if it was necessarily a memory thing or because I discounted probably what was memorable, right? But I was just like, I don't really remember what I had for breakfast. I don't really remember what happened during the day because I think part of me blocked it out because I didn't think it was important. So it was
Mm-hmm.
really hard for me to like go back and actually kind of write down what happened. But what I would go back and find myself doing is I would have emotions or I would be feeling something while I was in my journal writing something down. It's like, okay, I'm feeling sad or tired or depressed and right. So I'd have these emotions. And then out of these emotions, I would basically try to try to develop an illustration or a metaphor for how I was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So if I was feeling, just a really like simple example, if you feel sad or if you feel depressed, okay, that's one way of describing it. But if you feel like you're drowning or if you feel like you are sinking or like that sort
Yes.
of stuff. So what
More
happened
a
with my journal?
visualization of the emotional sensations that you're having, not just a what's the human word description, but how
Yes,
can how can I give myself a visual to understand what this sensation is in this emotional state.
exactly. And the journal was there to like make me understand more of what I was feeling. Maybe not necessarily what was happening, even though I might reference it or somewhere in
Mm-hmm.
the journal of kind of what was going on, or I might understand what was going on in my life if I read back my journals. But it's more of like what I was feeling and maybe how deeply I was feeling it. And so even now in my own personal poetry that I just do for myself that I write, it really starts as like an emotion or an idea, and then the rest of the poem is essentially trying to flesh it out in as many ways, as many like relevant ways as possible to me or to somebody reading it. Because I think I don't know, that's the bulk of why I read poetry. I read it to feel something, and I read it to get like truth or an idea, and that's always what I wanted to write. So
Well, and for poetry, very again similar to song lyrics, I think that's why it does resonate with people very deeply, and people can become very attached to it. There is something to the sort of rhythmic nature of poetry and the sort of I don't know, I guess vibrational musical sort of,
mm,
way that it is written. But it does, I think, in that way assist you in the imagery that is created and in the descriptions and in the various ways that you can expand on, like you said, feeling sad or feeling depressed is one very narrow sort of description of something. But if you can expand on that in a bigger way and visualize it, it does sort of give you maybe a more profound understanding, a deeper understanding of what you are feeling. And it can sort of help you to release those emotions, especially when they're negative emotions and you don't really know what to do with them and you don't necessarily know, how do I let this go? How do I process this out of myself?
right.
Certainly writing is a really great way to do that. So I do love this idea too that you're saying going into like therapeutic situations, rehabs, or things like that to would you sort of like you do like writing workshop type things for patients where you
I
would
would
sort of help them work through writing out their emotions or the process they're going through?
Yeah, so ultimately that'd be great to do some sort of art therapy or come in on a regular basis and do that. Just what I've been involved in just lately is I had the opportunity of going into one of the counseling facilities and just with the counselors on their normal kind of like weekly, up to date kind of getting together. I just gave them a few kind of exercises and just explained why or how this could, how this could help, especially if they practice it on their own, especially if they adopt it. So one of the exercises, especially, it was just simple. It was like to describe. It's basically to think of like your last meal, like one that's really like stuck in your mind, whether it's good or bad, like whatever else. Just think of like your meal or whatever else. And then basically the exercise is essentially, okay, describe that meal in one word, and then describe that meal in 5 words, and then describe that meal in 10 words. And maybe by, the 10 words, like you'll be pretty exhausted for words, but you'll notice how hard it is to encompass the whole of everything into just one word, as opposed to if you have, this expanse of words to describe this something, right? You end up feeling like, okay, this is a more full description. This is a more understood idea of what this thing is. And that's just like in people, right? And especially for people who have been labeled a certain thing, like an addict or somebody who's mentally ill or somebody who's this or that, right? They get really attached to one word to describe themselves. And so to just open up that box of like, there are more things that can describe and encompass what you are than, but you really have to find them. You really have to search for them.
That's amazing. I think that's really beautiful because I do, when it comes to mental health or those situations, I think that is true sometimes that people very much become sort of stuck in or imprisoned by this one label that you've been given, right? And it becomes the only label that you give yourself, and so you do have to sort of dig a little deeper and okay, well, what other things are you that maybe other people don't see or that maybe is not necessarily being pointed out to you or that you don't focus on that you could be focusing on. Like, I think that's a really great idea for therapy for people to see themselves in more than just one perspective, right? Because that is a way for you to really learn and grow about and again, just sort of process out of whatever, negative emotions or states you might be finding yourself in. So that's really amazing. I love that. Have you considered, so when you were saying this, I kind of thought of like, maybe even like nursing homes or like death doulas. I don't know if you're familiar with like death doulas.
Definitely. So it's a lot of like, really what that is. And I'm open to the whole gambit of it. But what slowed me down is really the legwork, because it's a lot of collaboration.
Right. Yeah.
For me to get my name out and for people to know and understand what I do and to even seek me out, right, is one thing where it's like, okay, I have to make a name for myself almost independent, because whether it's the funeral industry or the wedding industry or some of those industries where like they all have their value and it's all great, but it's also a bit of a closed system where it's like, okay, you got to get in a circle.
Right. Yeah. It's kind
you got to make your rounds.
They're each their own industry, sort of.
Yeah. And as much as I would love to like do this stuff like pro bono and volunteer all the time, like I can't, right? I could give like a few hours and then I got to get back to like paying rent, right? Or I got to get back to like
yeah, that's like it's always
in my car. Yeah.
Isn't that always just such a hindrance to like the creative life? Having to pay those bills. I tell you what, figure out universal income, government. Come on. There's so many of us who have so many good things we could be putting out into the world.
Well, yeah, and I would love to like, and that's part of why I want to get into like grant writing and doing some of those things, because it's just like there's so much money, I feel like, just like locked in, wherever that center is of like this,
right,
that could be going to so many like innovative, very cool community things. It just needs, the right proposal, but to get it is just sort of tough. And so I've reached out to so many people, and network is wide and you're casting your nets, but it's exhausting if like it's not coming back in the same speed.
Yeah.
And so I'm constantly like, I'm never not for it. Like I'm always wanting to collaborate and work with people. It's just just sort of an ebb and flow, as cliche as that kind of term is. But
well, and it's something that is a very unique type of service. So it's not necessarily maybe something that people would think of to seek out, I suppose you would say. So and I have a little bit, so I don't know if you watch American Dad, Roger, the alien American. I have his brain.
I watched a few episodes, yeah.
Okay, I just like everything is a business idea to me.
Yeah,
exactly. So with these things that you have available, you might want to consider, maybe would you ever think about doing something like an online masterclass or workbook of some kind that you could sort of offer on like Amazon, or have a YouTube channel or YouTube videos where you might walk someone through, various different, so maybe for something that's therapeutic, like here's some things that you can do in a therapeutic way, or if you are, maybe create another sort of like a master class on like happier life events, the weddings, the
Yeah.
graduations, the births, the things like that, that you could, create content or create like workbooks and sort of online workshops that can be available, on your website or what have you, that people can access and can use those prompts and those exercises
Hmm.
that you might be able to offer to people without having to necessarily you be there yourself,
Right.
but that content is available.
And those are beautiful ideas. And I think for me, it's the execution. And I think what it'll take is getting people to help me finish those things off. I mean, obviously, if I've told you I'm a typewriter enthusiast, I'm not a
Yeah.
great
The
like
technology is not quite
technology.
where your wheelhouse is.
Yeah. I'm getting better at it, but it's as someone who's resisted it for a long time, and it's tough too. So you have technology just as it is, and I think for me, I resisted it so long because I saw so many people abuse it. Right? I saw, being a millennial and being right, kind of, I was born in '91, so right, I kind of saw the whole like shift, and I also came from a big family where like talking and family time and dinners and all this stuff was like
Right.
important, and so you see kind of that whole arc, and you see the wave of change, and not that technology is bad and not that it can't be used for good, but I saw so many people abuse it, and so that I resisted it for so long, and so now I'm just starting to kind of like dip my foot back into it, but it's exhausting for me. So when I make a post on Instagram, and it takes me a half hour, 45 minutes to do that one post, and I'm like, gotta do this
So
every
you
day.
need a social media manager, basically.
Yeah, I need like everything. I need somebody to help
Yeah.
me like, finish my website, like social media, and just
Yeah.
like kick me in the butt and be like, okay, this is important. People like it. Just keep talking about it. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, and maybe when some traction is, and I can start to go downhill with it, maybe it pick up some
I
steam.
mean, I think that it is an interesting thing though, that I mean, technology is so useful, right? But I do understand like it can become very frustrating and things can become very muddled. Like, me again, as someone who's got a business mind, the things that, my algorithms constantly send, like trying to sell me people and their click funnels and you
Right.
can be a millionaire if you do this and that. And I'm like, so
Uh-huh.
tired of seeing this. I want to do my own thing. I'm not trying to be somebody else's shill for something. So
Yeah.
I understand the reluctance to jump in there on that point. But I do think that, have just the fact that you have a valuable service to offer and a unique perspective. I do think that there's an audience out there, somebody, the people who will appreciate what you have to offer are going to find you regardless, so
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that I think as creative people kind of slows us down a little bit. This idea that like we have to figure out all the right ways to, you got to be putting things on TikTok and you got to be putting out the content, and I think that some of those things can become a little overly done, right? And it does become too much. I do think that there is still an audience out there for the creatives who are offering something new and different, who are offering something of value, particularly to people who are seeking out something that is, emotional, therapeutic type, um, you know, tools for themselves
Mhm.
or creative outlets for themselves. So the audience I think is out there for you, as
Yeah.
certainly.
No,
So
and I appreciate that. I think it's more of just it's keeping it's keeping motivation and keeping myself inspired. I mean, artists always seem to be in the same boat, whether it's 500 years ago or today, where it's like it's getting out there, making a name for you
mm-hmm.
are getting people to appreciate. Right, appreciation of art has always been like uphill.
it's
um,
and it's a strange thing, and talking about how you've seen technology increased, you've also sort of seen the appreciation for art, like certainly in public schools and things like that, decrease and be depleted. Essentially, there's not a focus on really nurturing creativity in people, right? And
Definitely.
so for creative people, I do think that becomes something of a challenge in terms of, if it's not, if society is not necessarily placing an appreciative value on it, it is
Yeah.
difficult sometimes to get your name out there. But again, I do think that in a lot of ways, with the advent of the internet, there is a higher appreciation for content creation, for people who are being creative. People are looking for that because it's not something that is
Exactly.
instilled in us in schools or in our upbringing, right? We're looking for that thing because it has been lacking.
Yeah.
So I think that, to some degree works in our favor in terms of just being able to, but again, it's, there's a lot of stuff out there. So how do you sort of break
Well, and
through the
then
noise?
well, and then you get, yeah. I mean, saturation itself is a problem to an extent, and how a person pierces through that. But then you have AI and ChatGPT now, and it's it's very I don't know. I've resisted using it. I haven't even used it because I just like don't even want to see it. Because to me, it's not even that like it can't do it, and not that it can't do it well, or whatever the function will end up being. But if you think of, and I guess I just thought about it kind of just now, that it's like if we really value like the human mind, right, the human brain, right,
Mm-hmm.
and we think of like the human brain as being like the quintessential, like this is the most advanced, progressive, evolved thing, right, and our idea is to keep on evolving it to get better and better as humans, as a species, humanity, the earth, whatever
Yeah,
else.
absolutely.
Like using AI to the point where our brains are no longer functioning in a way to like to make new, like we have to be creative, or we have to create things by ourselves in order to keep that brain evolving, right? So as soon as we give that like function, or that duty, responsibility over to something else, and we stop doing it for ourselves, like we stop evolving, we stop like going forward. And I feel like that,
See, I think of
if nothing
I look
else.
at AI a little bit differently. I know that that's something that it is a controversial thing, especially for creative people. But
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, if you look at what AI creates, it can't replace humans. It's still,
Yeah.
there's always something about it that's just a little bit off because it's a computer, right?
Right.
It can only operate on what it's fed, and who's feeding it. We humans are feeding it, so
Right.
it can only be as good as what we can give it. I like to see it as being a bit of a tool more
Right.
for, and again, it does depend on your perspective and how you're using it. Certainly it can be something that sort of might make you mindless, or not putting in any sort of your own mental or intellectual effort. But like, for example, for like the AI art, like I have used AI art programs to generate images that go along with my writing because I don't
Right.
have that art skill and I don't, I would certainly love to be able to hire an illustrator. I would love to have that, money in my pocket to do that. But until such time as that is, my reality, I have
No.
to use the tools available to me. So I do think that it can be something that can be used as a tool to facilitate creativity. If maybe you're someone who is an artist and maybe not necessarily good with words, and you don't have someone to collaborate with that's a writer, you can, sort of use Chat GPT as a kind of a bouncing off point, or an assistive tool.
For
So
sure.
that's more, and again, I think it's all about your perspective of it, right? And how you choose to use it individually is what's gonna, what it will be, right? So it's
Well,
gonna be something different
yeah.
for everyone.
And mine is very conservative and like backlashy, because again, I'm resistant of tech, right? I'm distrusting of technology anyway, right? So like as soon as that came out, I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, like I had an existential crisis where I'm like, all right, so I've got AI writing, like I didn't have enough competition before. Now I have to
Now
like
you have to compete with
now
AI.
I have to compete with that. And I guess, for sure, definitely a tool. And I love that, that the computer can help you where, yeah, if you can't afford, or if you can't find somebody to collaborate with, where you can kind of
Right.
do some more of those things on your own. I think part of what scares me a little bit is just I think artists can see that it's different. Artists can see that like AI generated stuff is not the same as
Oh
human
no,
generated.
it's all got, I mean, if you try to do any sort of imagery that
Yeah,
is supposed to look remotely like a human, like the AI cannot figure out human symmetry. It cannot
yeah.
figure out human, like how many digits you're supposed to have. Like it's not, it does not have the ability to work those things out. So
I guess
right when I
yeah,
see that, I just think there's no way AI can replace genuine artists. It just can't because it's
yeah.
just not
I'm
able
just worried
to
about the appetite of it. Like if we already have trouble getting people to appreciate art for what it is, sometimes with AI generated stuff, I'm just like, is this what people are gonna like just assume that like this is this is the bulk, like the bulk of people who just are not artists or who are not art centric or whatever else. Like, I don't want that to just be what they think is enough or like what they think is
I see, but
makes
again, I'm
sense.
kind of on the opposite side of that
Yeah,
coin where I think having this AI imagery and the sort of the uniformity of it, but also the always being there's something about it that's a little off
yeah,
is going to it can also add to the appreciation of an actual artist because you will see the different. Like if you
right,
put up an AI image of a human and an artist drawing of a human,
yeah,
you're going to be able to spot it
yeah.
right away because
You
the
always need that
AI
human
just
touch.
cannot figure it out.
Yeah,
So, and I think a lot of how people are going to view it does depend on, especially creative people, does depend on the perspective we put out about it, right? So, I think that's a lot of things in life. Everything is about mindset. Everything is about the belief structure you create for yourself. And
definitely.
so, if you you can look at it that way, but again, like, I understand that sentiment, but in the space that I'm in my headspace, trying to like always look for the positive angle on things.
No, and I enjoy yours much better, and I think I'll take that into account. I
Because
think
it
it's
is. I mean, if you look at it's comedic really when
yeah,
you look at AI imagery and the way that this again especially with humans or even with animals if you try to ask AI to create a fox or
yeah,
whatever it's all there's always something not quite right about it and it is a bit comedic that AI can't quite figure this out. It's just taking from the things that are out there to try to create it and it doesn't it
yeah,
it doesn't have the human
yeah.
mind process. It
The
doesn't have the
imagination.
capacity to really fixate on detail, right? And so if you look at it that way, I think it might help people to appreciate more the detail orientation and the just the better quality of an
Right.
actual artist because it's better quality.
Yeah, and maybe it's just a better, maybe I should just start looking at it as just a better template, right? Like it's not meant to,
Right. More of a,
you know,
it's a starting point. Again, again, especially for someone like me who doesn't have the drawing skills, but I want to have
yeah,
like,
same.
I want to create imagery to go on like a video reel because again, you got to, creating content, putting your stuff out there when your chosen form is words like ours,
Yeah,
how do you do that? You got to have audio. A lot of people want imagery to go with the audio.
yeah,
So, if you're not going to be on screen yourself on YouTube or whatever, then what do
mhm,
you use? Right.
right.
So I do think it is just a tool, but it's something to kind of like build up your portfolio, I guess you might say. But again, obviously, our preference as writers is
Yeah,
that we would be able to collaborate with an actual artist, right?
yeah,
And get the better quality work. Just like I'm sure artists would prefer to collaborate with a writer than to use ChatGPT and get the
yeah,
quality of writing, right? Because
hmm,
ChatGPT just again is very comedic a lot of times in the way
yeah,
that it puts out
right.
content or information.
Well, and I appreciate that lean in attitude. I think as somebody who's kind of shut off, and for better or for worse, sometimes like the political sphere, the government
Oh,
sphere, the science
mm-hmm.
sphere, like all those other spheres where it's like I can't. I'm trying to devote all my time to this and all my time to like doing this thing. Because you sort of have to, right? If I want to be an expert, if I want to be the authority on like, okay, this is how you write a poem for somebody, like, all right, I got to dig into this.
Right.
Um, but with that, I think at least for me, there's a vulnerability of feeling like I'm either underestimating or overestimating like science and technology. Like when I first heard about ChatGPT or AI generated images, like I just assumed that it was like perfection, right? And so then I just like tried to like shut it out of my,
Yeah. No,
try to
but
get it out of here.
I think, you do. I mean, everyone has to have a filter so that you can do what you're doing to the best of your
Mhm.
capacity. So, you can't just let everything in. Everyone's got to filter out the noise of what doesn't,
Yeah,
suit you, what doesn't align with your things. But
but you got to get into it. You got to know what it's about, and
yeah, and I do just think that if you use it as a tool,
yeah,
it can be a way to assist you if you don't have that collaborative relationship in place. But
yeah,
it does, I think, definitely give, especially for creative people, a higher value, a higher understanding of the value that there is in that collaboration. Because ChatGPT is not going to write a poem in
right,
the same way
yeah,
that you will. It doesn't have the ability it's not thinking about what it's doing, right? It's
and
like a
that's what I've told
calculator. It
people.
just spits out information.
Yeah, and that's what I've told people that like it may have a larger lexicon than I do, but it won't have the same associations, and there's no way to like bridge those
Right.
without actual human connection.
Because again, ultimately, and part of what we've been talking about, emotions. ChatGPT and AI art does not
Right.
have the capacity to add emotion
Yeah.
into the creative process,
Right.
right? And that is what is always going to be very uniquely human. We
Yep.
have emotions and passions and thought processes that we put into this. It's not just spitting out created art or created writing just for the sake of it.
Yeah.
There's something from your soul that is put into what you create, and AI, is a computer. It
Right.
does not have that capacity to add that particular kind of energy to creation, to art. And I think that, the more that people see what
Hmm.
ChatGPT or AI art can create and compare it to
Sure.
what a genuine artist creates, I think the juxtaposition is going to be the contrast will just become higher.
Yeah.
And, so I think if you have that kind of a mindset about it, you can see just, that it is valuable as a tool, but
Hmm.
that it can also be valuable as I'm not sure how you would say it, but just as something that does help people to see you have to appreciate artists, you have to appreciate creatives and writers because
Yeah.
these, as much as it's great that this is available to people and people can use it to create content, it is going to like sort of, separate the men from the boys, for lack of a
Right.
better way to say it.
Yeah.
It does give you such a different way to view things. You think about people who create, YouTube videos or what have you with it just massively put together stock footage, chat GPT
Hmm.
information. you know they might be a hot ticket for a hot second, but
Yeah.
they don't have staying power, right?
Yeah.
Because there's no emotion, there's no creative energy put into it. And I think people see that. And again, I think that that's something people crave from
Yeah.
creatives is that energy and that emotion and that connectivity that you can put into when it's coming from a human, you
Yeah.
know.
Well put. I appreciate you indulging me on this tangent. It's probably one I wanted to have for a little while. So.
Oh, I know. Me too. Absolutely. I mean, AI is such a big issue, I think, and I see so many things, on the internet, in the news of artists that are getting really up in arms about it, really upset about it, and I just think you can't fight technology. You can't fight something that's developing. The best you can do is to try to use it to your advantage in some way. But
Yeah.
I really do think that again, it's something that will help people to see the
Yeah.
difference and the stark difference between something that somebody throws together because they can use ChatGPT or AI art and they don't really care. They're just trying to put something out there. And someone who
Yeah.
does really care about what they're creating and has a true passion for their craft, I think that it speaks volumes
I think it
when.
just. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I just think, yeah. I mean, I agree that ultimately it's not a substitute and it won't replace it. I think it sucks that whenever anything like this happens over technology, the timeline for people to realize what it is longer
Mm-hmm.
than the timeline that like artists have to like kind of make a living, right? Like,
Right.
right, like, okay, ChatGPT like gets to a certain, pinnacle of expertise or whatever, and it can write to a certain extent, and then right, all these writers get like laid off. And then, when it starts to pick up or it starts to die down, okay, then all right, then writers come back and like there's this resurgence of actual art and stuff. But what do you do in the meantime, right? It's always like the starving artist. It's like, okay, so now I gotta kind of find my way again.
Yeah. See, and again, though, I think that's another place where, and sorry, I'm not trying to be toxic positivity or
Oh,
anything,
no, I totally get it.
but it's kind of like my mind immediately, I go to the whole COVID pandemic. Yeah, it was scary. Yeah, it was terrible, but there were a
Mm,
lot of good things that came out of it in terms of people recognizing that, okay, well, maybe we don't need everyone to be in a 9 to 5 situation where they're always at an office. Maybe it's good
right.
for you to have a better work-life balance and for people to wake up to the idea that there's something else available, there's other things out there, there's other options.
Hmm.
So in the same vein, I think ChatGPT, AI, and these things that are, again, they're a hot ticket right now.
Yeah.
Is it something that is maybe, can as artists, how do you use this as a positive challenge to say, okay, well, how do we now come together as artists and find a new way to
Right.
create something of value, or to come together in a way where we can support one another in what we create and the value that we have to add that AI just doesn't have.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know what the answer to that is, but I do think, I know what you're talking about too, with like the writer's strike and things like that.
Hmm.
Like, okay, is there something that writers, creative people can do? How can we come together as a community of creative people to really create something that does allow us to to do this full time, right? To
Yeah.
to full time be supporting yourself with your creativity. I don't necessarily know what the answer is, but I guess that's kind of how I view it. It's the new challenge, it's the new sort
Yeah.
of obstacle put in your way to sort of force you into creating a new thing, to creating something bigger and better that is helpful to the creative community, to everyone.
Yeah. It's always a opportunity for, for adapting and for pivoting. Um, it's just, and granted, that's the line we chose, right? Because we find that it's more rewarding to be in that sphere of artists and philosophers and thinkers. But
Mm-hmm.
because of that, we're always the ones that kind of have to solve the problem, right? So
You're right. You have to be the one to kind of, okay, the old way doesn't work anymore. No one wants to use the old way anymore.
yeah,
What do we now need to create to replace it?
right.
You
And then
know?
how do we keep values and how do we keep all these other things that still need to be there, but in a different packaging?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is a challenge, but I think, again, and maybe just because I'm trying, specifically to be more positive about these things because
No, I really appreciate that, like, because I can get in a despairing, you know, mindset of it, and it is really good to have somebody just tell me, it's like, you know what, just it's radical acceptance anyway, right? It's like I can't change what it is
right.
anyway.
It's Pandora's
So
box. It's open.
yeah,
It's out there.
so I got to use it for whatever I can use it for and do better. Just do better. So for whatever that means. But yeah, what else did you want to? Sorry, I know I kind of steered us.
Oh, no, no, no.
Over the,
That's totally fine. I think, I do think that it's a valuable conversation to have
yeah,
just about, for creatives in general, anyone who's got that sort of entrepreneurial spirit, that creative spirit that those of us who don't necessarily, like, yeah, we have to do the 9 to 5 right now while we're trying to figure out how to make this the full-time support, but that's not where our soul is. That's not where our purpose is, and I
yeah,
think a lot of people can relate to that. I think there's a lot of people out there who have dreams outside of societal expectations of what you're supposed to be doing, you know.
yeah.
So,
And if nothing else, ChatGPT and all the rest, I guess going back to like my, first point with it, maybe after having this conversation, it's less about a fear of replacing it. It's just I don't want people to stop. I don't want people to stop trying to do art themselves. I find
right.
how important that is. I realized I never really kind of talked about why I started journaling or being so reflective in the first place. I mean, I had older siblings and my family was older, so I think I was always kind of exposed to older ideas,
Sure.
maybe
Yeah.
before that I would have been as an only child or whatever else. But part of it was a situation that I had growing up is that I was essentially the only child between my mom and dad. They never got married. They were together for 7 years before they separated. and they both had families beforehand before me, right? So I had half
Oh,
siblings
okay.
on both sides, and I was like the only like thing, kind of like
Kind of an
catalyst.
outsider a little bit.
Yeah, I felt like the only catalyst, and as a even as a they say that when we're young and children, like we're sponges, right? And we're
Hmm.
taking in everything just so intuitively that like
Yep.
it's just surrounding us, whether it's words or anything. Because I can't remember like anything that was specifically said, but at some point in my life, I internalized my existence as like this burden, right? Or as like this
Right.
like misplaced thing.
An
And because
afterthought sort of,
yeah,
and
and
not
because I did
belonging.
because I wasn't old enough or mature enough to process it in a normal way and be like, oh no, this isn't true. It's just the situation.
Hmm.
I internalized it for so long and it kept on compounding. So that by the time I got to adolescence, to middle school, to being a teenager, and I felt so like shitty, like worthless about myself. I'm like, where did this
Hmm.
come from? And I really had to like just write it out. Like I had to try to just like keep on like purging, essentially onto this page. And for some people that's words, like it was for me. Other people it's art. Other people it's whatever else. But I found just how valuable it is, and how singular like that art or something creative is really just one of the few ways to do that for yourself, to figure out
Right.
to
It
figure out what it is about yourself, like to just like find yourself really. And it's just
absolutely.
that's really what started it. So that was I noticed that it was helping, or I noticed that at least I could understand what was going on in my head and I could process it. And that was really the start of like, oh, okay, this makes me feel better. And I think that was really the start of like my poetic life, in a sense, and kind of kept it from there.
Well,
So
and self-expression, I think, in our culture is it's not necessarily encouraged, right? You're encouraged to be a drone and a robot more than you are to express your true self and your honest self.
mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, what I love about, kind of the idea you have in terms of helping people to express, a moment or an event or memorialize a person or in a therapeutic way, use this art because really and truly it is how we can express the person that we truly are and peel away those onion layers of
Mm-hmm.
the negative thought processes that are not part of who we are but that we do absolutely pick up, and especially in childhood,
Mm-hmm.
that no one was really, and it's getting better now, of course, in terms of like mental health and having these
Yeah,
conversations, but
sure,
certainly
awareness.
when we were growing up,
Yeah,
it's not as if our parents had the tools available themselves to be
no, they
able to
didn't.
assist.
And I talk about that a lot, where it's like, there's a lot of, and not saying that when you go into therapy, like talk about your childhood and putting whatever responsibilities or lacking on your parents, like not that's not valid, but it's so hard because our generation especially like is it's almost like the missing link in a lot of ways, that like
Yes.
previous generations, like my mom was a baby boomer, she was born in the 50s. It's like they didn't even know what it was, right, to be emotionally aware. Like they did not have the
It was
capacity
all
to see.
survival mode.
It was
And
all survival mode. It's like, how do
yeah,
you expect anything from that type of person? And it's like, yeah, maybe they weren't supposed to have kids, but at the same time, that was also what they were taught to do, to like fulfill life
right.
and be happy, was to have children. And so they just did what they were taught, just like we were. And so like I, I blame like the past generations like less and less the more that I find, where it's especially being a parent, where it's like you can only work with so much of what you were given, where it's like the rest you just kind of have to like let go. And
You do the best you can with the tools and the knowledge that you have at the time.
yeah,
And it's, I think, that is absolutely true. The older you get, the more that you see like, okay, my parents just weren't taught how to be emotionally intelligent. So of
yeah,
course they weren't able to be emotionally intelligent with me when I needed it.
yeah,
They didn't understand that themselves and they were never taught that. And that is true. I think, our generation is sort of a bit of a bridge, right, between
mm-hmm.
between that mentality and the newer mentality of allowing people to be emotional, allowing people to express emotions so that they understand how they feel and they can be a healthier whole human, in life, and to be more self-expressive and not necessarily always going with just what you're taught, doing what you're taught, not just being a sheep,
Yeah.
for lack of
Well,
a better way to say it.
And the biggest thing is questions. Even in this conversation where we're asking each other questions back and forth, where we're discussing those things. I think that if anything, and that is really at the center of what I try to do, is I try to come up with the best questions that I can. Obviously I let people talk kind of like however they would like, give me as much information as they would like, but I try to prod as best I can. Um, Especially for those experiences, because honestly, some people have just never been asked those simple questions of like, what was your dream? Like, what would you have liked to have done? What makes you
Right.
truly happy? And even for me, like, even if I was to think about how often I've been asked those questions genuinely, by a person who really wants to listen or who really cares,
Right.
a handful of times, right? I mean, how often are you asked those questions just about who you are, like at, the heart?
And
And
and how often is it, how often are you given space
yes,
to actually
and to
ponder
answer.
and consider that?
Yeah. And it is much like a
Absolutely.
therapy. It is much like a therapy session. I talk about this too to others, where it's like, I've gone into therapy where it's like I am troubled with something. It could be that I'm frustrated about somebody cutting me off, right? On like the highway, like getting there, right? But as I dig deeper and deeper and deeper and I'm asked more questions, I realize by the end of that hour-long session that really this thing, like childhood memory or whatever else, or fear of this or fear of that,
Yeah.
was at the base of why I am angry today.
Yeah.
And unless you give yourself time or a page to continue the roots of those causes, that's another exercise that I gave the coaches for the rehab center, was to basically take an emotion or take a feeling that you have and continue to ask yourself why you're feeling that way, and to try and get down, like, as best you can, as close as you can, to the root of
Mhm.
of that emotion. And you'll find that it keeps going. It's like a rabbit hole. It's just,
Oh,
and it
absolutely.
normally goes
And
back to childhood or wherever else, right? So
it does. And until you're sort of triggered into the negative emotion, into the upset emotion, you don't
mhm.
always necessarily realize that there's something that far back behind it that
Yeah,
you need to access and let go of. Like, it's so ingrained in your subconscious,
yes,
whatever that situation or that initial sort of like, where did you learn to feel that way? You
yeah.
don't necessarily know what it is. You
Well, when it
just,
becomes like chicken or egg situation, right? Like extrapolating those two things, it's like, I don't know whether I felt shitty or I did this thing that makes me feel like, which comes first,
right.
and once you try to parse those things out, I mean, that's where the real work comes from, and the healing. But no.
Absolutely. But I do think that, and talk therapy absolutely is very helpful, but I think that it is 100% true that creativity and using creativity to express yourself,
Yes,
it can sometimes help you to get out of your head, whether it's
yes,
writing or art or music,
definitely,
whatever it is. Because when you're stuck in your head on that loop of just being upset in that emotion, you're not getting to the source of anything,
yeah,
And so being able to find a creative way to do that, it makes, I think it makes that healing process less of a chore, and
yeah,
you can sort of make it more of a game for yourself. And if you can make it a game for yourself, there's something so much easier about accessing those difficult emotions or the difficult roots of where those are coming from, if you can do it in a creative way where I think it's a bit more soothing, I think.
yeah. Well, and in my experience too, and I would venture others as well. Um, when you do feel down, and it's easy to, with everything that's going on, and especially
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
especially globally, right? Like I am part of every single struggle, you know, in the world at this point, right? I have access to every single struggle that's going on, whether it's starving in Africa or the war in Ukraine and Russia. Like, I have access to all of it, right? And
Right.
it's all on my shoulders. It feels like sometimes, if I let it. And when you feel so helpless and you can't do anything about it, you do feel like you're taking up space, right? And so creating something is like, I don't know, creating something new and worthwhile and beautiful is like so relieving in that way. And
It is. And it's, you are adding to the good in the
you're
world,
adding, exactly, yeah. Instead
and
of
it's a it
taking.
it's a way for you to feel like, okay, I can't necessarily fix the problems in
Right.
Korea,
Yep.
but if I can create good in the world and put that energy out, someone will
Yep.
find that energy and connect with it. And that's, even if it's just one person, that's
Yeah.
one more person that's got a better feeling, better energy, and that's going to affect the people around them. It's a ripple effect, right?
Yeah.
And so
And so,
anytime you can do that, you are creating a ripple effect in the energy of human existence that
yeah.
you know I think that's something too that people sort of don't maybe focus on that much is when you really do truly express your true self and get into that creativity and allow yourself that space to be creative and to put that out there. You are in your own healing. You create healing for others because there's
Yeah.
somebody out there who's going to be able to relate to your story, to your art, to your poetry, to your writing in a way that is going to be helpful to them. And why deprive the world of that?
Right. Well,
You don't know who might need your work.
it's so reconciling. It's taking your experience and all the things that you may have done and all the mistakes and whatever else, right? We can wallow in those all day long, but to take your experience and put it out in the best way that you can, right, is making up for that in the best way, right? And that's how I've always felt, where it's like I got to make up for being here, and that's not always the greatest way to think about it, but it is a motivator where it's like, okay, if I'm going to be here, if I'm going to choose to take another day and all the resources that it takes to keep me alive and all the people that appreciate me and help me, stay here, then I need to give back. And
Mm-hmm.
art is such a great way to do that. So,
Absolutely. I love it. Well, I do want to be respectful of your time. We are at an hour here. So I
yeah,
don't,
no problem.
I do. This has been such a great conversation. I know we've kind of hit a lot of different points, but I
Yeah,
love it. It's been great. I do hope you will come back for another episode.
definitely.
But where can people find you? So I want to give you an opportunity to plug yourself, plug your information.
Sure, of course. Website, you'll find that definitely needs a rendition, but it's just www.inknell.com. That's INKKNELL.com. That'll be the website, but trying to post more. So I've got a couple different Instagram handles. So ink.nell is kind of more my business page, but if you want to read more of my personal poetry that I'll post more often, that's just SL Fischer.
Okay.
Instagram.
I'll definitely have those also in the description
Yeah,
link for folks to be
yeah,
able to click on and jump to.
yeah. But otherwise, just reach out, and whether that's email to, inkmail, at gmail.com, all those things. I love collaboration. So
Mm-hmm.
as often as I can, I'm always trying to band artists together and network and always like create something together because I feel like that's the best stuff that comes out when many people are into it. So
Absolutely support each other, share your audiences, share the wealth. I think
yeah,
that's one of the big things that I always say. There's room for everyone, and I do
yeah. And
believe
thank you so
that.
much for having me today. This has been great. This talk and
Thank you
uh,
for being my first guest on No Small Stories, because
yeah,
really
of
and
course.
truly, there is no such thing as a small story. Everyone's
True.
individual story it's big to them and it's big to the people around them, and I love what you do because I think it really embodies that idea. Everyone has a story that's bigger than what you can see on the surface.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'll definitely be back if you'll have me. So thank you.
Absolutely. I love it. It's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Take care.
Yep. Hi again, friends. That was my conversation with Shane Fischer of inknow.com. Do check him out. All the links are in the description for you to visit his website and list his services and see the works that he has done up till now. Thank you so much for tuning in to episode number 1 of No Small Stories. Remember, no matter how small you start, if you're an artist, a creative, an entrepreneur, a writer, whatever it is you do, your story is always a big deal to us. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, do visit us at our Patreon, patreon.com/No Small Stories. Follow us on Instagram, No Small Stories Podcast, and also on YouTube as the No Small Stories Podcast. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and leave a review. And if you yourself are a creative, we'd love to talk to you. Thanks, friends. Take care.